Okay, so in this objective 2, we're going to be able to use slope to tell something about that line. What kind of line you have. If I know the number, what does that tell me about the line? Or if I have the line, can I say something about the slope? And of course, I've got some dominoes here in the picture that are falling down. Each one of them has a different slope. Do you know anything about those slopes? How about one number compared to another one? The slope of one of those dominoes compared to another one. Let's take a look at this Geometer Sketchpad demo, move some lines around, and figure out something to do with slope. Alright, so all we have here in this Sketchpad demo, I just have myself a line, 2 points that are on it, using those 2 points to measure the slope. You can see right now it's measuring a big fat 0, and look at the line. It's perfectly flat, it's horizontal. So, well, there's one thing. If my line's horizontal, my slope's going to be 0. So let me just animate this point B, so it's just rotating around. Watch that slope number. See the number? I can see that it's getting larger, or I should say further and further away from 0. Look at this, how vertical it is. It's pretty close to vertical, not quite there yet. 14.56. Oh, do you see what happens? Now, past the vertical, it's switched over to being negative. All right. So now the number itself, the absolute value, is getting smaller. It's approaching 0 here, but it's still negative. Look at the line, what kind of line it is. Okay, and then when I go back to horizontal, it's switched to 0 and then past horizontal. Now it's a positive number again. Okay, so let's put all of those things together here on this next slide. So just simplifying it here, all I have is the picture. And if I put my line perfectly horizontal, my slope is 0. Okay, now let's move this up, and as I move it up further and further, more and more vertical, I get a bigger slope. So the steeper the line is, the bigger the slope is, the further away from 0 it is. And if it is perfectly vertical, I can see my slope is undefined. Okay, so now we switch past vertical, and now it's negative again. But still, if it's however steep it is, doesn't matter if positive or negative, the steepness is a really large number, absolute value-wise. Okay, and then I get closer and closer to 0 as I make it more horizontal. And then once I flip it past horizontal, now it's positive again, and notice that it's going uphill. It's going uphill left to right as a positive slope, and if I make it negative, it's going downhill left to right. A slope is 0 means that it's perfectly horizontal, and a slope that is undefined means that it's perfectly vertical. Okay, so that was pretty fun. So again, whenever we're talking about slope, or we're talking about whether the line rises or falls, we always go from left to right, just like we read. Okay, so let's fill out this little table here. When our slope is positive, when m is greater than 0, my line rises. Okay, when the slope is negative, from left to right, it's going to fall. If my slope is equal to 0, then it is perfectly horizontal. And then finally, if my slope is undefined, then it's perfectly vertical. Okay, so let's just, before we go on, if my slope is 0, the only way that is possible is if I have 0 on top and something else on the bottom. Okay, 0 on top. y2 minus y1 has to be equal to 0. Think about how that must be possible. Okay. Now over on the undefined one, that it's undefined because you're dividing by 0, which means x2 minus x1 on the denominator of that fraction must be 0. So you think about for a second, how is that possible for the denominator to be 0? Okay. And then finally, as the absolute value of a line increases, so or the slope of the line, so that number is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, what's happening to that line? It's getting steeper and steeper and steeper. Okay? All right. So, without graphing, tell whether the line through these points rises, falls, is horizontal, or is vertical. So I want you to go ahead and pause the video, calculate the slopes of each of those, and determine if it's rising, falling, falling, horizontal, or vertical. Alright, not terribly difficult, right? But I'm wondering if you caught some shortcuts on the last two. So let's take a look at our answers here. So number 1, the slope turned out to be -1, so that means it was a falling line. Number 2, its slope was a positive number, 4/11, so it's rising from left to right. And number 3, I didn't even calculate the slope. I just looked at the points and I saw that it was undefined, so I said it was vertical. Likewise, I didn't calculate any slope on number 4. I said it was 0, which was horizontal. So my question to you is, how did I get it so quickly without writing any math down? So let's look at this again. Up here on number 3, change this color over here to purple so we match it up. Okay, if it's vertical, that means it's undefined. And if it's undefined, if we have y2 minus y1, or x2 minus x1, that must be 0. The only way for it to be 0 is if the two x's are exactly the same. So you subtract them and then you get 0. So I can see here that the x's are exactly the same, therefore it makes a vertical line. Undefined slope. Alright, so let's switch over here to green so we can talk about the horizontal one. So for the horizontal one, I need to have a slope of 0, and that happens when the top is equal to 0. The only way for that to happen is if the two y values are the same. So when you subtract them, you get 0. So here, my y value and my y value are exactly the same. Subtract them, you get 0. It must be a horizontal line. Alright, so that concludes this objective on rising, falling, horizontal, or vertical.